Hi everybody, welcome to another Divorce Workshop Talks, the Insights in Divorce. Today we have back one of our favorites, Shauna Warden, who's going to talk to us. We're going to talk about surviving a high conflict, Breaking Bad, surviving a high conflict divorce, and co-parenting versus counter-parenting. Let you know that Just Separated Workbook is available worldwide on Amazon. So, there she is. Good morning.
Hello. How are you?
Good. How are you?
Good. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah, you're great.
Okay,
It's fun.
perfect.
It's before you do a bit introduction. I have like pages that I worked on this morning because this topic is so big.
It is. I know. I've been thinking about what to say, and it's like there's so much to say.
I know. I was like, where do we even start? But first, introduce yourself briefly, and then we'll go from there.
Yeah, absolutely. So I am Shauna Warden. I'm a divorce coach, and I'm located in Richmond, Virginia, in the U.S.
And yeah, so this is the second part of our Breaking Bad series, right? And this one, you and I both have experience in as well. The
Yes.
counter-parenting. So I guess we could start off by saying like co-parenting is hard enough as it is, right? Like
Yes.
we, I think you have your checklist, right, that people can get from you, and the workbook Just Separated has a bunch of that stuff. So we know that's difficult. What makes counter-parenting more difficult is a lot of things. Like I even have a whole page of some of the ways they show up. But in simple terms, for me, in my experience, everything I did was wrong.
Hmm. Yeah.
I don't know if that's the same thing for you.
Yes, absolutely. And it becomes like you're banging your head against the wall. Like, what can I do to make this relationship work? Like, the marriage already didn't work out, but now you're still having to deal with this person in the most important relationship that you have, which is that of your child. And I remember going to co-parenting therapy and just saying, like, everything I
Hmm.
say, right or wrong, will be the opposite. If I
Yeah.
say the sky is blue, he'll say it's green. And there's just no convincing otherwise. And it just becomes really frustrating.
Yeah, I had the same thing even when I would say the birthday was wrong. Like it was little things even, right? Like
Mhm.
everything. So I guess that's why it's called counter parenting, because we want flexibility, cohesiveness to try to for the best interest of the children, but this doesn't always feel like the best interest of children. It feels more like control, right? It's more of an
Yes.
yeah.
Yeah, and I think that becomes the very frustrating part for the parent who wants to co-parent peacefully. I feel like usually in my personal experience and my professional experience, there's usually one parent that wants to co-parent, and there's
Mhm.
one parent that is the counter parent. And for the one who actually wants to co-parent, it's very frustrating because now you are almost in this public space being lawyers, courtroom, therapists, the whole night, teachers, wherever you go, coaches, you are now part of a team that can't figure it out. And
Mhm.
it's not for your lack of trying, it's not for your lack of education on the matter. You're now part of this unit that when people see you coming, it's like, oh God, here we go.
Yeah.
And for me, it's like, I don't want to
Mhm.
be like, this isn't what I want. You know what I mean? And that can be very frustrating.
Yeah, it shows up with some clients too, where it's like I had one where you know they're very routine at her place, but then at at the other person's place, the counter parenting, the 6-year-old can stay up till 11:30 on their laptop, right? So it's like the child comes home, the child's really tired, and like to her house, and it's like so. It's very, very frustrating. But I just wanted to do a
Yes.
list of see if you can. So they wanted they use guilt, right? Like you don't love me, to the children. Um, they refuse access or they'll limit time with the other parent. Um, they'll control who can be involved with the child.
Mm-hmm.
Um, they can be the overindulgent fun parent. So there's no
Disneyland.
rules. The
Disneyland
Disneyland.
parent.
Yeah, yeah, and that's pretty common too.
Yeah.
They'll intentionally violate the parenting plan,
Mm-hmm.
or they'll follow it to a T, which means no flexibility at all, right? And we know co-parenting, the best is to be flexible, right?
Yep.
Interferes with communication with the other child, with the parent, like with the child to the other parent, diminishes the other parent's role, even refusing to pay child-related expenses for that's type of a control too, um, and creates division.
Mm-hmm.
So the child has to pick one or the other. Those are just a few things I want to list off that that's how it can show up. I'm sure it can show up in many different ways, but
Mm-hmm.
any other thoughts on that?
No, I think that's a pretty good list. And I'm sitting here like, check, check, check. Yeah. But yes, so I was reading something interesting where, and it puts words so clearly, like my thoughts into words where I'm not always able to. And it's,
Mm-hmm.
just like everything else, I feel like co-parenting's on a spectrum. Some of us are, on one end, we want to be that flexible co-parent that can bend and go with the flow, and you don't have to, like, it's great to have a parenting plan, it's great to have a court order, but those are usually like the bare minimum that you should be doing, right?
Mm-hmm.
Now, can you go over and beyond that? Yeah, of course. So you could be on that end of the spectrum, or you can be on the complete opposite end where if it's not in the court order or the parenting plan, forget about it. It's not being done. Or, you can't text, call me, email me. There's no communication. It would be nice if you could find a great, like the happy medium, right? Where you're co-parenting with boundaries. And that's, I think, the hope for the courts and the lawyers and everyone that gets involved. But like everything else, control and power and ego comes into play, and it really ends up not becoming about the kids at all.
Oh no.
It's very much, how can I hurt you? This is what you want, so I'm going to say no. Yeah, so I think the people who want to co-parent now have to shift their mindset. And I think we've talked about it before, where us as pleasers, we're always like, if I just say yes to this, if I just let them get their way with this, like they'll leave me alone, we'll have a good, better relationship. And there's really nothing that you can do that's going to all of a sudden, aha, now we're going to have a great relationship. So you really have to become firm in your
Mm-hmm.
boundaries.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I actually wrote some tips down. What is your thought about parallel parenting?
I think that's basically what I do in my own
Mm-hmm.
personal life, not really out of want, but out of
Yeah.
necessity. And so I really don't have communication
Mm-hmm.
with the other parent unless it's about appointments, about school related things or sports related things. I think it is necessary for some
Mm-hmm.
people to do parallel parenting, or else I had to come to a point where I could no longer allow this person to control my life. I mean, you get divorced, so go away.
Mm-hmm. 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 Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? And even, I'm remarried, I have another child from this marriage, and it's like, you're still infiltrating my life, and for
Mm-hmm.
the worse, not for the better. And so you have to get to a point where you are coming to terms with, okay, we are no longer co-parenting. That's not healthy
Yeah.
for me. My mental health was suffering, my physical health was
Mm-hmm.
suffering, and therefore I can't raise my child to the best ability because I'm not at my best. And so I agree with it when it's the only option.
Mm-hmm.
Now, do I think like you should ask for a divorce and instantly go into parallel parenting? No, I think you should make the effort to try to
Mm-hmm.
co-parent. Now, of course, there's exceptions like abuse, drugs, things like that where it doesn't fit in. Um, but give it time to adjust, for everyone to adjust, and for some of the egos to hopefully calm down. But yeah, if you're 2, 3 years out of your divorce and you guys are still in this toxic, tumultuous place, that might be the time to start really putting up some of these boundaries.
Yeah, I want to talk about the children in a bit, but it's like there's other things too, right? Like for you to just also, when you're dealing with this type of person, for you also to think about your children who have to, they're with this person too. So you create consistent routines and you create a safe place for them, right? Like there's things that you can do to make sure you're that secure parent. And I think we've mentioned before that, you know, having one secure parent, I think it's been well researched, really can help buffer the relationship with the other co-parent.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so that's just a couple of tips I want to, you know, also I want to mention that, you know, how frustrating they can be. That's their high conflict type of personality, is we don't want to trash talk them in front of the children,
Yeah.
right?
Mm-hmm.
I mean,
No, you don't want to trash talk them. And I think it really, like most things, depends on the age of the child. And I think your girls were a little bit older
mhm,
when you guys separated. Mine was a baby. And so you might not have experienced, and maybe you have, I don't know. But from my son being a baby and then a toddler
mhm,
and now a big kid, I kind of have to rework how I
mhm,
approach things based on
mhm,
age. And so even 8 years later, I'm still constantly having to revise. Yes, I've never, I don't badmouth them, but you also want to be honest with them too,
mhm,
right? And so having those conversations that are age appropriate can be tricky, especially if you're not in the field like we are. You don't, and even being in the field, I don't always know the right thing to
right?
say or, what's going to help. And so now it's, if he wants me to text dad about something and he says, okay, has dad responded? I can say, no, he hasn't responded. I don't have to, cover for dad, but not also be like, no, he never responds. He's such a
Right.
piece of work. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? So it's really
He's such a
like, be,
jerk.
yeah, it's like,
Yeah.
be honest, but be still, you know, I don't know the right word, not protective of the other parent, but there's no reason to throw them to the wolves, in front of your child.
Yeah, I also want to point out that, you know, in my case, that my girls are older. They're figuring it out on their own,
Hmm.
right? They see patterns eventually. I don't need to always tell them about all the patterns. They see it. Um,
Yeah.
and all I do now, I mean, they're young adults now, and all I do is validate, right? I don't go
Hmm.
on and I say, I'm sorry that this is happening. That's, you know, and actually they kind of rely on each other to talk it through as well, because they're only 2 years apart, right?
And that is honestly what my saving grace in my parents' divorce and beyond,
Mm-hmm.
because as you know, it lasts forever, is having my sister. I have a sister.
Mm-hmm.
We're same as your girls. We're like 18 months apart,
Mm-hmm.
and she was there. We went through the same things together. And so having that person to bounce ideas off of or just talk things through with is great. I feel bad for my son. He was the
Mm.
only one. And so it's like really just him having to deal with it. But if you have siblings going through a divorce, I find that to be an extra layer of comfort because they do
Yeah.
have each
I
other.
think there's even been research about that, about how it helps them, because they can talk, like your sister and you, and like my girls can do. You know, I had an older sister too. We just didn't talk about it.
Hmm.
Like it just didn't. But that goes into a whole other thing that we can talk about another time about, I don't know what word to use anymore, alienation, coercive control, or abuse by proxy, right? Like there's all three of
Yeah.
them. Because I know, I just want to, we'll talk about this another time, Shauna, but this type of, some of these behaviors can lead to that type of stuff, correct?
Yeah. Oh,
Yeah.
absolutely. And, we both work with clients, and especially me, I work with most of my clients come to me at the beginning of the
Mm-hmm.
divorce where they are just trying to figure out how to get divorced. They're not even really thinking about co-parenting yet, or they don't even know what's coming down the line in terms of co-parenting. And so, it is a long journey that we are on in this, even when you get your divorce decree signed and you've got the official, paperwork saying that you're divorced. If you have kids, it that is just the beginning, really, of the journey, unfortunately. And, for those people who can co-parent peacefully together, that's amazing. It's just not all of us are lucky enough to have that. And so it takes a lot of work to come to a place of contentment
Mm-hmm.
if you can get there.
Yeah, acceptance,
Hmm.
right?
Right.
And there's also
Yeah.
a grief component with that, because you'll see these beautiful images on TV or movies, and their co-parenting is, oh my goodness, it's so wonderful. And then you're going, there's no way this would ever happen in my, um, because of these type of personalities. Now, these type of personalities, they can be from everything, right? They're not always diagnosable things. It's just that they're just conflictual people, right?
Hmm.
But I like what you said, let's things settle down first to see. And if you're seeing patterns, then you know that you're probably going to have a more challenging time. And it's not really going to be co-parenting. It's going to be more single parenting, I think Dr. Ramani calls it, or counter parenting.
Hmm.
So I want to also make an element that you need to really practice self-care as well, because it's a journey, right? Like, it's frustrating.
Yeah. So I think talking about some like practical tips on how to navigate this would be good. And
Mm-hmm.
so in terms of self-care, like what you just said, I always, me personally, myself, started implementing this, and now telling my clients to implement this is to take and I think this is probably, I think I read in your book, the pause, right?
Yeah.
Most likely you guys are not communicating face to face or over the phone constantly. I think most communication is typically text,
Mm-hmm.
email, the
It's
parenting apps,
safer
and
too.
safer too. And this was my second point, was documentation. But
Yeah.
um I would fire off those texts and those responses, and then of course now you're just digging yourself a hole, and it never ends. You have to be the one to cut it off, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so if you're not in a space to respond effectively, unless it's an emergency, in which case they're probably not emailing you or texting you. If it's not an emergency, give yourself an hour, 2 hours. Heck, I even did 24 hours.
Yeah. Sleep on it.
Yeah, because the response you give them immediately versus a calm response a little bit later are two totally different people responding. And so that's one thing that I really, really tell people to implement, is to just take your time, or write out your hate-filled
Mm-hmm.
message and tell them what an idiot they are for even suggesting such a thing. But don't send it, like email it to yourself, or
But is
you know.
it, isn't it interesting though? Because that's clients too. They're like, Karen, I want to say this. I have to. And it's a natural response to defend yourself, right?
Yeah. And,
But
and I think we don't have it now, or we didn't have it when we were going through it, but my gosh, I'm jealous of people now who we have Chat GPT. I know people who just throw in what they want to say into
Mhm.
Chat GPT and say, okay, now turn this into a professional sounding response, and then let them do the work for you.
Right. And
Just
no
send it.
emotion, right? Like, show no
Right.
emotion. Just
Yeah.
because you can get these texts or you can get these emails that are just attacking you for as we talked about at the beginning, of every little thing you did wrong. Well, most of that doesn't need to get talked about, except when does Pete needs to get picked up,
Right.
right?
They're baiting you. And
Yeah.
this is what, again, I tell the clients, it's like they know what buttons to push. They were married to you, they know what
Mm-hmm.
you care about. If you care about their clothes looking a certain type of way, they're going to send them back with a stain on them, or they're going to attack you because you didn't send their clothes back, appropriately, or that sock is missing. And now that's the biggest
Mm-hmm.
problem in their life this week. I mean, to the point where I'm like, do you need me to buy socks for your house? Like, this is the biggest issue going on?
Mm-hmm.
I will buy you a pack of socks to keep at your house. Like, what is the problem? You know what I mean? And it's the
Mm-hmm.
small, like you said, the smallest things. And it's like, get a life.
Yeah. Yeah.
You know?
And I think it's, as I said before, it's accepting, and that takes a while, because it can feel really angry. Like, why are you guys like doing this, right?
Right.
But as we've said probably many times, not just in this series, but with certain type of people, they'll never change. So you can scream at them and say, get their socks on, do this. They're never going to do it, right? So
Right.
it's just more about controlling or helping yourself rather than trying to figure out how to control them.
Yes, and you in your grief work, I'm sure you do this a lot with your divorce clients. It's just because, I've had in talking about acceptance and going through the whole stages of grief. I mean, me, even, 8 years out, if something happens, like I could be going along just fine, everything's great,
Mm-hmm.
I'm in my own little bubble, and then something happens that triggers me, and now you're right back
Mm-hmm.
into the same space that you were at the beginning, and you're really having to remind yourself, okay, how did I handle this before? How did I get out of this dark
Yeah.
space when I'm feeling triggered? And or you could get back to anger and resentment, and those things don't go away. They just kind of come in waves, and you have to remind yourself, like, how did I maneuver this before?
Yeah. It's all about how we cope. I do notice that there's still a component of grief that my children had to deal and have to deal with this person. And that's
Mm-hmm.
something that I try to talk when I talk about the grief stuff, is that there's an element of grief there because for myself, but even for the kids eventually, right? Because what do they see on TV? What do they see with families, right? And they're like, oh, why is my family like this? Like what, you know what I mean? So there's a lot
Mm-hmm.
to at the core that sometimes comes up with these type of like personalities. I did want to mention, because, you know, this is a big question, but do they love their children? And I wanted to know your thought on that. So I had a couple points. So, because I've thought about this many times, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because of their behaviors, it doesn't really indicate that they really do love their children.
Yeah, I know.
But I don't really know if they may love their children. I don't know if they have the capacity to have that nurturing, healthy relationship with their children. So I don't know if they're able
Yeah.
to, because they're so emotionally not able to regulate well. They don't usually, not all, because it's everyone's different, have great empathy. So they
Mm-hmm.
can't connect with their children really well. So I don't know what your thoughts on that are.
I love that you're bringing this up because I literally was thinking about this morning in
Mm-hmm.
my own world, the and I'm not I'm not Dr. Ramani, I'm not an
No,
expert on this,
neither,
but
neither am I.
my thinking is I think they love them in the only way that they know how to
Mm-hmm.
love, the only capacity that they have to love. I just don't think, not only with their children, but with anybody, I
Yeah,
don't think they have the capacity to see past themselves. You know what I mean? And that's that empathetic part that you were talking about. They're always going to be their number one in
mm-hmm.
their life. Nobody else is going to be number one. This is
No, I
my
agree.
opinion. This is not research based, but um, you know, I think most parents that are not narcissistic or high conflict or whatever you want to call it,
Mm-hmm.
we put our kids
Mm-hmm.
first, as much as we can. And I will say, yes, there is a need to take care of your own, like yourself,
Mm-hmm.
but in at the end of the day, my kids are everything. Like
Mm-hmm.
if they're not okay, I'm not
Mm-hmm.
okay, and I just don't see high conflict people think like that. It's like
Yeah,
I come first and then everybody else falls in line behind me. Does that make sense?
makes perfect sense. And when I was beginning the like separation, and I would go and talk to trusted people that, and no one could, like, they'd always say, does he love the children? Like they couldn't believe that how his behavior, even to this day. But I've kind of come to the acceptance of, I'm not really sure, like you said, all these reasons, lack of empathy, inability to, they're always going to be number one. um, but that's a really big question, right? Because
Mm-hmm.
I think it's probably more complicated
Sure.
and more like psychological because of their personalities, but their patterns of behavior. I don't know about yours, but patterns of behavior don't really are on the same values of what, as you said, most of us who are non-high conflict would show to our children.
Hmm. And this is a very small example, and this probably doesn't apply to everybody because I understand people work 9 to 5, they can't take off,
Mm-hmm,
all
mm-hmm,
of those things. I'm not
mm-hmm,
discrediting that. But just as an example, I had a client just today say, because I'm always like, don't be the secretary. Don't like they get the
mm-hmm,
same
mm-hmm,
memos that
mm-hmm.
you do. There's no reason to like remind them of the Thanksgiving lunch at school or whatever, because I get the memos. And so she was asking me, I know you say not to be their secretary, but should I remind him this is coming up, even though he gets the memos because he doesn't ever come. And I'm like, but that's his choice. He gets the memos and his choice is not to come. And so
Mm-hmm.
just in this example, like for me, I will be at every game, every recital, every
Mm-hmm.
school thing as my schedule allows. Yes, if it's during the day and I can't get off of work, okay. But if you're at the majority of your kids' things, like that's an involved parent. You should be at your kids' things when you can, get them, but not going just because it's not like it's not of interest to you. Um, that is like, why have kids if you're not showing up for them? You know what I mean? That to me is just something I don't understand in my own world. And I know a lot of
Mm-hmm.
co-parents that feel that way. And
Yeah,
that's
yeah.
just a small, doctor's appointments, things like that. You can translate it into whatever you want, but just
But the
sending
same
them
thing here.
another memo
Yeah,
isn't going to make them show up.
yeah. But also, as you said, like, is it your responsibility, right? Like, it, as I said, takes a while to like co-parenting and an adjustment, right?
Mhm.
But you don't really, everybody gets school emails, right?
Right.
So,
Now, granted, there are some instances like with co-parenting, and these are the things that like I've had to do. Just this past weekend, like my son joined basketball, and the coach sent out whoever signs him up, gets the email. Coach sends out the email to all of the parents. I always check the list. Is dad on it? No, he's not. So then I do an email saying like, hey, can you add dad to your roster to
mm-hmm,
get the emails? Okay, I will do that. That's, something that's fine with me. But once I've done that, that's out of
yeah.
my hands. You know what I mean? If I see you on the list and you're not coming to things or whatever the case may be, that's no longer on me. That's a you choice.
The funny thing is I had the exact same thing, but I got also a nasty letter about that, about why aren't you, so it's just the same thing, is the patterns of behaviors, right? So I also
Yes.
just wanted to mention that, and this is hard to mention, but there are effects on children when you're dealing with high conflict personalities, right? And I see it with my own girls. There's their anxiety. They have more
Mm-hmm.
anxiety. Um, self-esteem can be an issue, right? Confusion, right? Because they're
Mm-hmm.
not really. So there are, I just want to be honest with people too, that there can be, and to be mindful of that, that when you're dealing with these challenging personalities, that it can affect the children as well. It
Mm-hmm.
affects yourself. We haven't even talked about that. Like, that's not a subject of today, but it can affect our own being and mental health. So just a reminder that it can affect your children's as well.
Oh, yeah. We've been through the ringer for sure. And like I mentioned earlier, each age brings a new level of
Mm-hmm.
understanding. And so just because you explain the divorce or you explain the dynamics, however that looks in your family, does like it's not a one and done conversation,
No.
unfortunately. I wish it was because every time it's like a constant talking about it. And at every age now they have different questions, they have new questions, and it it can be a little frustrating because it's like, oh my gosh, like why do I have to
Mm-hmm.
keep going over
Mm-hmm.
this? But
Mm-hmm.
um certainly with my own child, yeah, it's been a lot of he has anxiety, he deals with, and it doesn't always show up as divorce related. It could be school related. You know what I mean? Like their feelings are so big and now they don't want to go to school. They don't want to go
Yeah.
to practice. They miss daddy the whole time at your house. So then you feel like, bad about that. And then they go to dad's house and now they miss you. Like they're never content
Yeah.
anywhere. And it's heartbreaking because you just want them to be happy and healthy. And it's a struggle.
Yeah. It's like I think I've said this before that we have to remember that children grieve 100% of the time because, as you said, they're at mom's, they're grieving for dad, they're at dad's, they're grieving for mom, and we grieve however whatever our time is, right? So
Mm-hmm.
just remember, we think about ourselves like, oh, I get the kids 60% of the time and I'm missing them that 40. Yes, that's valid. Just remember that sometimes, a lot of times, the kids are also grieving 100% because when they're with the other, they're grieving you, and when you're with, right? So it's just something to remember because we kind of can get swallowed into our own pain.
Mm-hmm.
So
Yeah, and I think, like you said, this is probably a completely different
yeah.
series post
Mm-hmm.
for us, but there's some things that you can do and say to like make the transitions easier and
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
if and it's all child dependent, and each child is different. And so like for a lot of kids, when they come home, don't drill them about what happened at dad's. Don't get in their face or be like, oh, I missed you so much. Like, yeah, that's true, but
Mm-hmm.
that's just going to make them feel worse. And so I really just like don't plan anything for
Decompress.
when they come home.
Let them decompress.
Yes. And so let them just kind of like, if you play a video game or play a board game or read a book, like whatever they feel is best for them to do that transition without having to jump right into the family
Yeah.
schedule immediately because they need time to transition.
Yeah, we can do that after we're done our Breaking Bad series because that's something that I, as a divorced kid too, right? My mom would say we would come home and we'd act like crazy people. Like she's like, "What is going on with you guys?" Right? And
Yeah.
it was just, think about this. This is the 70s. She didn't know.
Right.
There's no books. There's no coaching. There was absolutely nothing out there. I think the research was just starting to go around, like start about the how effects on children divorce. So she did the best she could, but she said, "Boy, we were like, my sister and I were like jungle kids. Like it was just crazy." But
Yeah.
anyways, anything else you want to add before we wrap up on co-parenting versus counter-parenting?
I mean, I think for just, I always like to give practical
Mm-hmm.
tips on how to deal with counter parenting, co parenting, all in between. I think this is where it's really important to have a parenting plan if you are in a high conflict divorce. And so just having an outline, the lawyers, the courts, whoever are going to give you like your holiday schedule, so much more to raising kids than that. And so having a parenting plan that way it kind of minimizes the disagreements down the road because you've already
Mm-hmm.
figured out a lot of topics. So I would highly suggest a parenting plan. And then in terms of communication, like we talked about earlier, I am not comfortable with face to face or phone calls just because everything can be misconstrued. It could be like, I never said that, whatever. So I would really stick with, text, email, even text I don't love because it's so, you can
Mm-hmm.
manipulate it so much now. Um,
And they can
but
go on and on
email,
and on and on, and like they can just keep going at it,
right.
right? And you're like getting ding, 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 and that can cause you to get upset. And
Yes.
emails or the apps are good. I recommend the apps
Yes.
to a lot of more challenging breakups because the tone
Certainly,
meters.
right. Certainly we use the apps for like a year. And I think it was really helpful. And like you said, it was so triggering to me to see his name
Mm-hmm.
calling me or texting me. And so just having it in like one app where I can, choose
Mm-hmm.
whether or not I'm looking at
Mm-hmm.
it, I highly suggest apps. So yeah, that and just setting a time limit of like a response, like we talked about earlier, I think is really important.
So documentation, boundaries, strong boundaries, self-care.
Mm-hmm.
Know that they won't change, right?
Yes,
Yeah.
that's so hard. That's
And
hard in life in general,
yeah,
let alone this.
and don't um defend yourself either. Like, don't, when they start talking about things that don't really matter, and they will, it's one of the biggest lessons I had to learn,
Hmm.
because I just want to scream at him, and just, so, I mean, there's lots in this whole episode we did, but I think those are some of the top ones. But
Yeah, and I think you're right. And I went through the same thing where I felt like I had to defend myself, or I had to like warn people. Like if we got a new teacher or a new whatever, I'm
mm,
like, oh, here we go again. I've got to tell them my whole, story. You don't have to tell them anything. And I had to learn just letting my character speak for itself.
yep.
People who know me know what I'm
Hmm.
like, and people who don't know me over time, you'll get to know me and see, where we stand. And so it's exhausting having to defend yourself all the time. So just
Hmm.
don't do it.
Yeah, and I think what I said earlier is, as the kids get older, and what I've noticed, and I think years ago my therapist told me that too, is that they'll start seeing themselves. You
Hmm.
don't, you don't, as you said, you don't need to give them it, like, you can be tell them exact kind of what's going on, but they're going to eventually, because my dad was high conflict personality, and I
Mm,
figured it out on my own.
right.
Like, I got hints, I saw patterns, I saw how he treated my mother, and over the years, and I'm just saying, I did eventually figure it out. I went, this is like, so that's another just tip I want to mention too. But
Yeah. I
anyway,
think we all, divorced or not divorced, everybody's got, some dynamic in their family. And I think at
mm,
some point, kids, especially when they start becoming adults themselves, they really start to understand their parents, but for better or worse.
yeah, yeah, true, right?
Yeah.
And also to
Yeah.
mention, like, there's a lot of people that are on the personality, high conflict personalities, not just your parents, right? So
Right.
you're going to be dealing with these kind of personalities from your boss, your coach, you know what I mean? Like, they're everywhere.
Yeah.
So anyways, that's another topic in
Yeah.
general. But
Yeah.
anyways, before we wrap up, anything you have going on you want to share before we go?
I did want to just highlight my podcast, especially
Hmm.
earlier when you were talking about, on TV and movies, we see all, or even in books, like other divorce coaches or professionals writing these books about how you just need to get out of your own way and be a good co-parent, and you guys can like vacation together and spend holidays together. That's not realistic for everybody. And I know some people who are watching that or reading that, they start feeling insecure
Yeah.
about their own life, their own co-parenting, not for lack of trying. So anyway, that's what inspired me to start my podcast, to have real stories about real
Hmm.
co-parents, real divorce. That's not sunshine and rainbows. And so if anybody is looking to have other voices to listen to where it's not, we're not on vacation together, certainly feel free to listen to the podcast, which is just called the Divorce Chronicles, and you can find it on Spotify.
Awesome. Yeah, it was great to be on there too, because it is in reality, it's not all what we see on TV. And you're
Hmm.
right, it kind of brings, even for me, I was watching Mad Men yesterday, and they have a really good co-parenting, like their talk, and I mean, it's kind of a messy story, but I'm like, wow, there's no way. Like,
Hmm.
and I was feeling like, you kind of feel guilty,
Hmm.
right? Because it is
What's
best for
wrong
the
with
children.
me that I can't
Yeah,
do that? What's wrong with
yeah,
my situation? And that goes back to like, oh, if I just try harder, well, you'll kill yourself
yeah.
trying harder to
Don't
please
bother.
everybody, and you can't. It's not going to do anything.
Don't bother.
So,
All right. Well, thanks for joining. I think we're
thanks.
December 9th at 12 noon, and it's all about holidays with Breaking Bad high conflict individuals. So
Oh,
that'll be fun.
fun.
Yeah, I know. Anyways, good to see you, and we'll talk soon. And thanks, Shauna.
Yeah, thank you, Karen. Take
Okay.
care.
Take care. Bye
Bye
bye.
bye.